wondered what it's like to get electrocuted? We'll take it from our next guest. It's not something you want to work out firsthand. About 30 years ago, what was meant to be a quick job almost killed Gladstone electrician Anton. And since then, he's been on a mission to raise awareness about workplace safety and why trying to rush things to save 5 minutes could wind up costing you your life. Anton is with us this afternoon live on Drive across regional Queensland. Thanks for joining us.
Adam, thanks for having me on Drive this afternoon. Can't wait to talk to your listeners and explain to them all of those things that you just shared. And being a safety advocate is a very important role because it does save lives.
You're going to take us back to 1994. What happened to you?
Mate, I made a really silly decision. So I was young, I was rushing, and I got tasked with measuring inside a switchboard where a component was going to be mounted. And so there was a little bit of free space in the switchboard. Imagine your switchboard at home for the listeners at home. Imagine pulling, the cover off your switchboard and you're in behind the switchboard where potentially there's live wires. And as I was measuring the decision that I made, Adam, was to use a steel ruler to measure inside a switchboard. Now, yes, if I was on stage at the moment, I'd say repeat after me. Well, that was silly, wasn't it? And as I used that steel ruler and that switchboard, it either got close enough to or it came in contact with live electrical conductors called buzz bars, which carry a whole lot of fault current, and that fault current caused a massive explosion. So for the visual picture for your listeners, imagine literally a bomb or a grenade going off in front of your face, and that was both the heat impact and the pressure impact. So I was blown back off my feet, I was blown back onto the floor, and I came into contact with ionized air that was heated to about 20,000 degrees C. So it was really hot, obviously. And they say 4 or 5 times as hot as the sun, which is a really weird thing to say, but apparently the sun's 4,000 or 5,000 degrees C, and I came in contact with 20,000 degrees C, which obviously scorched my skin instantaneously. And for your listeners, the visual picture is imagine just burnt skin, imagine burnt meat, because that's what my hands look like. And blew some of the skin off, and it was partial thickness burns, thank God. So I didn't have 3rd degree burns. I had 2nd degree burns to about 15% of my body, which was really uncool.
So this is an experience and something that plays out in a matter of seconds, but it has consequences that last for how long, Anton? Oh,
Adam, I'm telling you, so for 10 years after that incident, I could not talk about it. So I was undiagnosed, but I would say that I suffered through what would be called post-traumatic stress now. I still to this day cannot reset a switchboard. I still don't like going to it. I send my son or my wife to reset the switchboard when it trips, sadly, which isn't very brave, but it's just this weird thing that they say that you just get back on the horse, but it's not that easy. So it took me 10 years to actually start speaking about this incident. And once I did, obviously, I realised that there was power in my story. And I realised that what psychologists now call the journey of post-traumatic growth. So you go from post-traumatic stress to post-traumatic growth when you realise that, hey, I've had this experience, I've lived through it, and I can actually use it for good, and I can actually do something with the experience. And so I started talking about workplace health and safety, and I started talking to leaders particularly about how to keep their teams safe, and not only physically safe, but psychologically safe as well.
Hearing here from Anton. He's sharing his journey as an electrician in the Gladstone area almost 30 years ago. He was almost killed on the job when trying to save 5 minutes nearly wound up costing him his life. Thankfully, he survived to tell the tale, and he's now a safety advocate. Prior to that, Anton, or even subsequent to that, had you had other experiences of either near misses or little shocks that you might have got that people may think of as electrocution, but actually aren't the full-blown electrocution experience?
And great question, Adam. Great question, because for your listeners, there'll be some listeners out there who each time you say the word electrocution, they'll go, holy dooly, did that guy die? So the word electrocution actually means fatally injured. So electrocution means death. Electric shock means that you were shocked to some level that you survived the incident. Yeah. So,
I'm learning.
that's. I know, right? But what's really interesting is those two words are used interchangeably. So, it's cool. But the thing was that my family got a call to say that I'd been electrocuted. Would you believe? And they thought that I'd been fatally injured, which is really why that word is probably an important one to me. But yeah, had I had electric shocks before that? Yeah, would you believe, Adam? Like, we've come so far in the electrical industry. Back in the day, as you can imagine, I love those sayings. Back in the day, back in my day, it used to be like a badge of honor or normal or okay or expected, to get a shock, to get a tingle, or to bump something. Oh, wow, that was interesting. And now in industry, electricians, if they even get the slightest tingle, we send them off to get what's called an ECG. So we make sure that their heart isn't impacted, because we know that it really doesn't take a lot of current to impact someone's heart, especially if there's an underlying condition, which some people don't even know they've got. So had I received a shock or something like that, or an electric contact before that incident? Absolutely, because it was normalized back then. Thank God it's not now, and thank God now we treat even the littlest incidents like that with so much more care and attention than we ever did in the past.
You mentioned sort of the idea or notion that you just get back on the horse eventually. Could you get back on the horse and go back to work as an electrician after that electric shock?
Mate, I had to. Like, back then, like, I wish I knew now. That old, I wish I knew now what I knew. Well, I wish I knew then what I knew now. So since then, I've well, okay, let me tell you the story very quickly. I had to for 3 years, because that's all I knew. I didn't I literally came out of my apprenticeship, and it was my first 2 weeks of work out of my apprenticeship, and I got interviewed for my first electrical job the day that I got out of the burns unit. So after the incident, I went to intensive care, because you get internal burns as well, and they were worried that I was going to actually die from internal burns, but that was okay. And then so I was off to the burns unit to get all that skin forcibly removed, which was a bit of a tough job, and that was in Brisbane. And then a month after I'd got to the burns unit, I got out and I got interviewed for a job over in WA in the mines, and so I went to work as an electrician, but I went to work on mobile plant, which, in other words, low voltage. So it was like big trucks and excavators and drills. And so most of my work was with, say, batteries or lower voltage. And yes, even though, yes, there was some high voltage, and there was there was obviously still a hazardous job because it was in mining, but I was scared every day at work, and that was the weird thing. Like, I really struggled to work as an electrician, couldn't wait to get off the tools, made a decision in the burns unit that I would not work as an electrician for any longer than I had to, and I kept that commitment to myself. 3 years after I got out of the burns unit, I got off the tools into planning roles, and I've since studied HR, psychology. I'm now doing a PhD into leadership, and I'm going to do a doctorate into how leaders can actually lead under pressure and keep their teams psychologically and physically safe, and in a way that is in control. So that's probably a longer story of, did I go back to work as a sparky? Yes. Did I want to? No. Was I scared doing it? Absolutely. Could I get off the tools? And I did, and I couldn't get off quick enough. So
you're hearing the lived experience here of Gladstone man Anton Guinea, who in 1994 survived a 20,000 degrees Celsius electric shock. These days, he is a health and safety advocate, trainer and speaker. Do you find when you do your workshops and your talks, Anton, tradies a little bit reticent to sort of open up about this, or are they very happy to speak about their experiences with electric shock?
Oh, mates, like, depends, eh? It depends, Adam, on, and that's a great question. How do people sort of take the message? And like, one-on-one with me, Adam, I tell you, mate, I've heard the most horrific story. Like, people come up to me after the sessions and say, Anton, and one person lifted, I'll never forget this, they lifted their shirt up and said, Anton, I got ripped up in the harvester, right? And I was like, oh, because I don't do the gory stuff. And, I saw some scars. And so one-on-one, I hear everyone's safety story. In a group, not so much. Some people share in a group, but it's generally that one-on-one where they just, they need an ear and they can't wait to to share their lived experience. In a group, it's interesting because it depends on, I guess, the group, and it depends on the culture of the organisation, which is obviously driven by their leaders, and whether it's okay to speak up, whether it's okay to talk about safety, whether it's okay to share lived experiences on a site where potentially, safety may or may not be their top priority. And so, in answer to your question, one-on-one, 1,000%, people love sharing their stories. In a group, it's a mixed bag, Adam. Some organisations that have got a great safety culture, the conversation's open, slather, people talk about their learnings. But here's the thing, I encourage people to, because I feel like people that have had something like this happen to them have an obligation, and I know that's a big word, they are obliged to share their story, because other people can learn from our stories. If you've had something happen to you, and this, I hope your listeners are out there and there'll be someone listening to this, and I hope it just prompts something for them. Your story matters. And I think people can learn from our story. They can learn from our experience. And what survivors like myself want to do is make sure that other people don't go through what we did. And that's what drives the work that I do particularly, and other people that do this sort of work. But I'd say to people, if you've been through something like this, if you're in the post-traumatic stress period, let me reassure you that there's light on the other side, that this pain is temporary, and that if you get the right help, and if you get the right development and the right support, you'll end up in post-traumatic growth. And at that point, you'll be able to share this story and actually potentially save a life somewhere. So that's the long story.
It's a powerful chat we've had with you, Anton. Thanks so much for reliving this with us.